These are the hills above Nazareth where Jesus grew up. And it was probably up here that he came as a boy to hide among the trees, to pray and to mull over the ancient scriptures, which he was convinced contained the key to his identity and the lifetime's work that God had for him to do. As an adult, Jesus clearly had an amazingly comprehensive grasp of the scriptures, and we know this must have developed early in his life. There are stories of him staggering the theological teachers in the temple by the questions he was asking when he was only 12. Jesus must have heard from his mother right from his infancy the stories of Bethlehem and the angels and all that had been forecast about him by the kingly visitors from the east, and the aged Simeon and Anna in the temple, so he knew that God had marked him out to do something special. And so he went to the Bible to find out what it was. That's because Jesus believed that God had spoken through these writings, through the prophets of bygone centuries like Isaiah and Micah. Their prophecies were not just for their own day, but saw far into the future and talked about what would happen centuries after they were dead. The God the Jews believed in was a God of revelation, one who dwelt in mystery, but loved his creation and wanted human beings to know exactly what he was about. So, as a Jew, Jesus believed in predicting the future in some ways. He didn't believe you could do it in the fortune-telling way, staring into a crystal ball or consulting tea leaves to find out whatever you wanted to know. He did believe that God spoke through his prophets and foretold the future. You have to be careful, though. Prophecy wasn't a matter of predictions quite so much as it was all about promises and pictures. Promises tell us what God's going to do, but not when he's going to do it. That's why Jesus' disciples asked him after the resurrection, "Lord, are you at this time going to restore the kingdom to Israel?" They knew he was going to do that. He was the Messiah, so that was his job. But the question was, when would he keep that part of the promise? And Jesus' answer is very revealing. He simply said, "It is not for you to know the times or dates the Father has set by his own authority." Elsewhere, he made it clear that he himself didn't know some of the information the Father did. All the promises would come true, but they weren't going to be told when. We're not told either how the promise is going to be fulfilled. Sometimes it's possible that a promise is kept in a way that's different from the way it was first presented. For example, the owner of a little cafe says to his son, "One day, my son, you will own this shop." But then his business does rather well, and he sells it to buy a whole restaurant. And by the time he dies, the son inherits a whole chain of hotels. Now, is he going to complain because the promise wasn't kept literally? Of course not. His father has given him something much better and kept his promise. And so Old Testament prophecies use the language and ideas which a prophet living in those days could understand. But they're painting a picture of something which is still far ahead and which God may fulfill in a radically different way. Lots of Jews in Jesus' time were looking forward to a Messiah who would be a tribal Jewish leader and who would rise to international status in the Middle East. Instead, God has sent his own Son to do something staggeringly painful and humiliating, but which impacted the whole world. Then there are pictures. If you read the Gospels, you find out that they point out again and again pictures from the past which echo in the life of Jesus. For example, when Herod is trying to kill the baby Jesus, his family become refugees in Egypt for a while, and Matthew immediately says, "This fulfills the prophet Hosea, 'Out of Egypt I have called my son.'" Now Matthew knew very well that this wasn't what Hosea thought he was talking about at all. So is Matthew just being deceptive and twisting the Bible, desperately trying to fit the words to Jesus? Well, not really. He believed, as Jesus did, that in the old prophecies there were pictures, sayings, situations that echoed again and again throughout history, finding a fulfillment many times over and finding their ultimate fulfillment in the life of Jesus, because he was the one whom it was all about. That's why the early Christians used the old prophecies again and again in their preaching to Jews. They weren't trying to say, "This is the only thing this picture is about." They were saying, "Now look at all these pictures from the past." They chime in again and again with facts that we know about Jesus. Doesn't this suggest to you that all the scriptures are pointing in his direction. And when you look at the promises and pictures they heaped up together, it's a pretty compelling argument.